I'm Kathy with a C.
And I'm Kathy with a K.
And this is Killer Destinations. Today's destination is Fort Collins, Colorado. Located about an hour north of Denver, Fort Collins is the last city in Colorado before you cross the border into Wyoming. It was named after an Army outpost founded there in 1864 and decommissioned just 3 years later. The old fort is the location of the popular downtown area, which anyone who's ever visited Disneyland will notice it bears a strong resemblance to the theme park's Main Street USA. And that's because the designer grew up in Fort Collins. The city is also home to a Colorado State University campus that brings in almost 30,000 students during the school year. As a result, the city has a robust social scene with a vibrant downtown and more than 20 craft breweries. And the residents of Fort Collins are particularly proud of their park space, which includes over 966 acres of parks, trails, and conserved natural areas. But in 2013, the city's pride turned to horror when the site of a brutal attack took place in one of its beloved parks.
On the last Friday of August 2013, which coincided with the Labor Day weekend, there were a ton of residents and college students alike enjoying the great weather and the last vestiges of summer. They were hanging out at bars, they were eating dinner, sitting on the restaurant's patios, and having picnics in the park. And because it was a weekend, people stayed out later and drank more than they normally would have. But even with all of this hustle and bustle, it was a quiet night for the Fort Collins Police Department. Nothing too serious had come in, mostly rowdy college kids who'd had a little too much to drink. But then, around 4 a.m., 911 dispatchers began fielding calls from almost a dozen people who lived in the same neighborhood next to Cottonwood Glen Park. All of them said the same thing. A woman was somewhere in the park screaming for help. So Fort Collins police officer Dane Stratton headed over to see what the ruckus was all about. He didn't know if it was a legitimate call yet, Kath, or just, complaints about drunk people leaving the bars and yelling. And so as he got to the park, he rolled down his windows so that he could hear better. And almost immediately, he heard the woman screaming, but it sounded like she was in agony. But even using his powerful spotlight on his police cruiser, he couldn't see anything. So of course his concern was, it's a big park, how is he going to be able to get to her quickly? But then as Officer Stratton turned onto a service road, the headlights of his car revealed the screaming woman. She was naked and bound with what looked like blood all over her face. She was seated on the ground, her hands were behind her back, and she was beaten and bloody, and Kath, the only clothing she had on was one sock. As the officer got out of his car and ran toward the woman, he realized that the red he saw on her body and face wasn't only blood. She'd been bound over and over again with red duct tape. Not only were her hands bound with it, but it had been wrapped around her head, her hair, and the top of her face so that it covered her eyes. And even though she was still alive, it was just barely. As Officer Stratton leaned in to help, the young woman looked toward the voice and in a scratchy voice told him her name was Amber Smith.
What we know about Amber Smith is that she was 20 years old when this attack happened. She was living in a studio apartment in Fort Collins with her 3-year-old son, Gabriel. But there's not a lot of background information we could find out about her. But we did read that during her teenage years, she started hanging out with the wrong crowd and got into some trouble. And it was during this time that she dropped out of high school and wound up getting pregnant with her son. But now at the age of 20, Amber was working really hard to turn things around, and she had recently earned her GED, and she was working full-time at a local 7-Eleven to pay for her apartment and take care of her son. And her son Gabriel was the light of her life, and she wanted to make sure this little boy had everything he needed. Amber was also blessed with a close-knit group of friends by this point who adored her and her son. And they described Amber as being a phenomenal friend and amazing mother. They all agreed that she was the nicest person you could meet. So when the EMTs arrived at the park that night, they were able to carefully cut the bindings off of her hands. And Kath, there was so much tape, they described it as looking like she was wearing mittens. And the EMTs slowly removed the tape from her forehead, her hair, her face, and they were trying to figure out how badly she was injured. The officer is with the EMTs inside the ambulance trying to get more information from Amber. But at this point, she is completely agitated and her agitation is growing. She couldn't or wouldn't answer their questions, and everybody was having a hard time trying to calm her down. So by the time she reached the hospital, all they knew was her name. That was it. And at the hospital, the doctors determined that Amber had suffered a broken jaw and one of her eyes was almost swollen shut. She also had a horrible head injury that led to a brain bleed.
And Kath, I actually read that they knew immediately she had a brain bleed because blood was coming out of her eyes.
Oh, that's so terrifying.
And I guess that's a good thing.
Oh, it's a good thing
because you want the blood to leave.
Yeah, you want the outlet. So in addition to these, horrific injuries, Amber had almost been strangled to death. She had these very deep ligature marks and bruises on her neck, and she had been violently raped. By the time she was sedated, doctors were not sure if Amber would survive her injuries. So, Kath, you know how we have several cases where we talk about like a single person who seemed to make all the difference in someone's recovery, whether it's a physical recovery from an attack or emotional recovery? This story has that too, in the form of a Fort Collins police detective named Siobhan Seymour. So she came from a law enforcement family. Her father was an FBI agent and her grandfather once worked for the CIA. So Detective Seymour was the mother of 2 young boys, and knowing that Amber had 3-year-old Gabriel waiting for her at home gave her major motivation and made her tenacious about Amber and Amber's case. And she wound up being Amber's biggest ally through all of this. So when Detective Seymour arrived at the hospital, she knew she had to speak to Amber, even though she knew Amber was suffering from trauma and likely well medicated. And so through the course of sort of finessing information out of Amber, Detective Seymour found out that Amber's memory of the attack was extremely hazy. But slowly, she was able to tell Detective Seymour that she had been enjoying a rare night off from work and she'd gone out with a friend. So her sister-in-law was babysitting her son, and this friend, Eric.
With an A.
Yeah, Eric with an A, A-R-I-C, whatever, Eric.
We feel like that's important to mention.
Anyway, she went out with Eric with an A, and they went to Rossboro Park to hang out and have some drinks. So it was Friday night, and Rossboro Park was a hangout. So basically, when she and Eric got there, there were other people there. It was a place to be.
As Amber's talking to Detective Seymour, she's telling her that she remembers that she drank too much and wound up falling asleep on the picnic table where they'd been sitting. And when she regained consciousness, she was bound with duct tape and a man was on top of her. Amber remembers being on her stomach on the ground and her hands, feet, mouth, and head were bound with duct tape. She started to scream through the tape as loudly as she could and tried to break free from it. And Kathy, what Amber didn't know at the time, she was actually in a different park that was almost 2 miles away from the park she went to with her friend Eric. Now, Amber told Detective Seymour that she couldn't see the man's face when he was on top of her, but remembered him bashing her in the jaw before placing a rope around her neck and strangling her until she lost consciousness. But it was in her final moments before passing out, Amber said she remembered thinking of her son Gabriel. She told herself, "You can't leave your son behind. That's your baby. You've got to be strong. You've got to pull through this for him. You can't die. That is not an option." And then the next thing she remembered was waking up naked, bound, and bleeding. And her attacker was gone. So, Kath, the forensics team conducted a sexual assault exam on Amber and processed her hands, face, and neck anywhere the attacker might have touched her for DNA. They also swabbed every inch of the red duct tape. And now, of course, they had to just wait for the results. So Detective Seymour, though, she's not one to sit on her laurels. She is going to go find out what happened. And she knew the first person she needed to talk to was the last person that Amber knew she was with that night, which was her friend Eric. Eric was 20-something and he lived with his parents, so Detective Seymour got a warrant and headed to their house. She got there and spoke to Eric's mom, and the mom said, "He's volunteering at our church, but I'm happy to give you the address." So the detective took it and headed over to find him. Once she found Eric, she sat down with him, and he basically echoed Amber's story, that she was drinking with him at Rossborough Park, and after having one too many drinks, Amber fell asleep at the picnic tables. And Eric told the detective, seriously, I was irritated that she fell asleep. But you know what? She was fine. She didn't need me to be there anymore. So I left her at the picnic table and drove around for a while. But as he was driving around, he felt kind of guilty about leaving her asleep, so he went back to the park to check on her. When he got there, he saw that Amber was still there and she was still asleep, so he thought she'd be fine there if he left her. And so then he went home. And you know, Kathy, you and I have talked about this before, and I know we've talked about it on the podcast, and this was Gavin DeBecker, who we worship. And he's talked about the fact that when you ask a man what he's most afraid of when it came to his interaction with women, the man said, "I'm afraid she's going to laugh at me." When Gavin DeBecker asked a woman what she was most afraid of in her interaction with men, the woman said, "I'm afraid he's going to kill me." So there's a big disparity there.
Totally.
So we don't know how Eric was raised. We don't know what Fort Collins was like. You know what I mean?
And we also, we don't
want to cast aspersions, but
we also don't know if, we know that there were other people in the park that night. Did he think she knows so-and-so will give her a ride home? I don't know.
Right. Or I'm sure she'll wake up soon enough and somebody will help her find a ride home.
Right.
So Eric told Detective Seymour that he and Amber had not had sex on their outing. He said they were just platonic friends and insisted that he did not do anything to Amber. And so the detective said, "Okay, put up or shut up. We want your DNA." And Eric said, "Fine, be that way." I'm just kidding. I'm paraphrasing, but he said fine.
Yeah.
And honestly, the way Detective Seymour looked at it was he can proclaim his innocence all he wants, but we're going to wait until the DNA tells us the story.
Right.
Because the DNA doesn't lie.
Does not lie.
Now, Kath, when the detectives were back at the station and we're talking about what had happened to Amber, and they're talking about what they know, what they've learned, what they still need to find out, and they know that Amber's attack had all the earmarks of a practiced predator. He got Amber away from, even if it wasn't her friends, a group of people,
right,
without raising any sort of concerns, and transported her a couple of miles to a brand new park.
Can you imagine being Amber and discovering that you were at an entirely different park? I just can't imagine.
You have no memory of it whatsoever.
That poor girl.
They also didn't think it seemed like it was the work of a stranger, because why would you attack and brutalize somebody to the degree that he did if this guy didn't know her or have a grudge against her? But of course, everyone was counting on the DNA to provide the identity of the person who committed this heinous crime. So when the DNA results came back, and Kathy, apparently they came back pretty quickly, this was fast-tracked. But the first thing they realized is that the DNA from the rape matched the DNA from the duct tape. So that meant the man who sexually assaulted Amber was the same person who wrapped her in duct tape and tried to kill her. Now, the bad news was the DNA didn't match anybody in their database or CODIS, nor did it match her friend Eric.
Eric with an A.
Exactly. And so, of course, Kath, this news hit detectives hard, especially Detective Seymour, but nobody suffered more at hearing this than Amber. All of a sudden, every male she knew or even ran into on the street was a possible suspect. Because, there are millions and millions of offenders whose DNA has been entered into CODIS. But all of a sudden, Amber's attacker was a ghost. But investigators were tenacious and didn't give up looking. And so they started looking into some of Amber's other friends from her mid-teens when she wasn't making the best choices to see what they had to say. And so day by day, one by one, the men in Amber's former circle of friends and acquaintances were questioned, and each one willingly provided a DNA sample. But one by one, every man was eliminated as a suspect. Now, over the next several months, there were no new leads and no similar assaults being reported. And it became very clear that whoever had attacked Amber was a stranger who'd managed to avoid capture. But was he still in Fort Collins planning his next attack, or had he dipped?
While the detectives kept detecting, Amber now had to find her new normal. So even though she was afraid of all the men around her, essentially, she didn't want to leave Fort Collins because that's also where her closest friends and her family was located. And she'd survived and had a little boy who needed his mom, and understandably, as the months went by without answers, fear and hopelessness were two emotions she battled daily. And so, as you can imagine, Kath, she is trying to hang on, and she's like hanging on by the skin of her teeth, essentially, and she is blaming herself for the attack. You know, she kept thinking, oh, I shouldn't have gone to the park. I shouldn't have partied so much. Why did I drink so much? If I wasn't drunk, none of this would have happened. And so she was really, really beating herself up about it. And within a year, anxiety totally took over her life. She became super closed off, super isolated, and would not hang out with anyone anymore, let alone those she was even close to. She was literally falling apart and didn't think she'd ever be able to move on from what happened. It was literally the wound that she feared would never heal. Now, right around 2015, so this was 2 years after her attack, a group of her friends and a few of their acquaintances gave her a lifeline in her struggle to get better. All these people lived in a house together, and they're like, listen, we love you. We love your little boy. Why don't you come live with us? We have an empty room. It's a safe place in a safe neighborhood, and we will help you, and we will help you with your son. So Amber and Gabriel move in, and Amber finally felt safe. And in this house, it was a mix of girls and guys, and she soon became close friends with 2 of them. So Bryce Bailey and Bryce's childhood pal, Stephen Moon, who everyone called Sam. Anyway, so she becomes buddies with Bryce and Sam. And this is funny, Kathy. Sam didn't rent a room. He was actually the resident couch surfer, and everybody treated him like the house mascot. But it's like, it's like when you're young, you have people like that.
Totally.
Like you wake up in the morning, you go out in the living room, you're like, oh, hey, you.
Exactly.
How you doing? So gradually, Bryce, Sam, and the other housemates helped Amber literally learn to smile again. But particularly Sam helped her. He was smart, he was gentle, he was a good listener. And over the next year or so, Amber finally felt comfortable enough with Sam to share her traumatic attack. And it was the first time she had really been able to bring herself to talk to someone about it. But having time and someone to confide in helped Amber start moving forward. And just 2 years later, so this is 2017, 4 years after her attack, Amber and her son, who was now 7, moved into their own small apartment, and Amber was on her way to creating the life she always wanted.
Now, although Amber had found a way to accept the fact that her attacker may never be caught, Detective Siobhan Seymour never gave up. She was still monitoring any new cases that crossed her desk that shared any similarities to Amber's, and she regularly checked Colorado databases and CODIS to see if there was a DNA match yet. But then, shortly after Amber moved into her new apartment, they got a break in the case. And it came, Kath, from a very unlikely source. It was a man who had called police to report that his bike had been stolen. Now, the owner was none other than Bryce Bailey, Amber's former housemate. So police went out, they did a cursory search, and they actually found the bike at a pawn shop.
It tells me that they did not have a high crime rate.
At least not for bike thefts.
Although maybe Bryce's bike was really, really special. I don't know.
I don't either. I didn't see that. Now, here's the thing. When you pawn something in any state, federal law requires pawnbrokers to get a driver's license or passport, and the shop is required to write down all of the information. Now, Colorado law, as well as a number of other states, Nevada being one, they've added a little addendum to this law, and they now make it a felony to provide false information to pawnbrokers. You know, Kathy, I'm sure that they've all done this with the hope that it would deter people from pawning stolen goods. I'm not sure that works. I bet there's always a workaround.
I'm assuming there's a workaround.
The honest folks wouldn't know it.
Right.
So when they found the bike at the pawn shop, the owner was more than happy to give the police the information he'd gotten from the seller. So using the address on the ID at the pawn shop, police went to the suspect's house and arrested him. At the station, he was booked, and because in Colorado you have to provide a DNA sample for all felony arrests, the man was also swabbed and added to CODIS. And soon, the crime lab got a hit on a case they'd been working on for 4 years. They finally knew the identity of the man who attacked Amber Smith.
When Detective Seymour got the news, she went straight to Amber, as you can imagine, Kath. Not only to give her the good news, but also to show her a picture of the suspect to see if this guy knew Amber or was just a total stranger. So Detective Seymour goes to Amber and says, "We got a hit and we know who the DNA belongs to." So Amber is kind of freaking out, but she sits down on the couch with the detective, who pulled out a photograph of the suspect. Now, this is a picture that she took off Facebook. Amber's reaction was immediate. She shrank back and was like, no, there's a mistake. This isn't real. This is not accurate. And Detective Seymour was like, oh, no, this is real. Like, what's with your reaction? What's going on? And she had to explain to Amber how DNA was real and how it worked, and this was the guy. And it was like a 1 in 10 quintillion match.
And Kath, I actually didn't know how big that was. And it's a 10 followed by 18 zeros.
Okay, I didn't even know quintillion was a real thing.
I didn't either.
So
I think they're making it up.
So
you can't trust science. You know how scientists are.
So anyway, the man's DNA was found in the rape kit, all over the red duct tape, and on Amber's neck where the ligature marks were. So Detective Seymour was explaining everything, but it didn't make sense to Amber because she didn't even meet this man until 2 years after her attack. The man in the picture was Sam, the couch surfing former housemate who made her feel safe enough to talk about her attack. And to Amber, Sam was a good and gentle and kind young man who treated her and Gabriel very well. So Amber was totally reeling at what this meant. So Amber is telling Detective Seymour, how she knows Sam and what he meant to her at this very pivotal point in her life. And Detective Seymour was like, sorry, this is the guy. This is the guy. And if you're actually buddies with him, you should call him and confront him on the phone. Let's do that and hope that it elicits some kind of confession. Let's make this case against him ironclad. So Amber agreed without any hesitation. And the next day at the police station, she called Sam with Detective Seymour listening in.
According to a 2019 Dateline episode, Left for Dead, when Amber first called, she and Sam were catching up like old friends. But Amber quickly got to the point. She said to Sam, remember how I told you about that stuff that happened to me in 2013? That guy who broke my jaw and stuff? And Sam was like, yeah. And Amber said, the police just contacted me and said your DNA matched up with that crime. And Sam was shocked. He was like, oh my God, Amber, I don't know what to say. I did not hurt you. And Amber was like, okay, but they have your DNA, so how do you explain that? And so Kath, understandably, Sam was just stumbling over his words. He was denying any involvement. But after a few minutes, Sam was like, oh, I think I know what happened. He said, this was Rossborough Park, right? And Amber was like, yeah. And Sam said, okay, we did have sex, but I didn't hurt you. I met you there after I responded to a personal ad you put on Craigslist offering free sex. So that must be how the police got my DNA. And with that, Sam ended the call. Now, Amber, of course, still didn't remember a lot about what happened that night. And so all that went through her mind was, is there any way he's telling the truth? So Detective Seymour's been listening intently to this call, and she knew that Sam was lying. She said she could almost hear his mind spinning as he tried to come up with a plausible explanation for all of the evidence Amber told him about. So shortly after the phone call ended, police went to Sam's home and placed him under arrest. He was charged with attempted first-degree murder, kidnapping, sexual assault, and other related charges. But in the interrogation room after Sam's arrest, rather than trying to manipulate Amber, he was faced with who we like to call the skirt detective. And that is high praise.
High praise. One of these days, Kathy and I are going to make up shirts that say skirt detective, Killer Destination School of Law. We're going to do these things. We keep saying it's only been 5 years. I mean,
So, well, not quite.
We're in no rush.
Yeah.
We're in no rush.
We know you guys will like them when they come out. We're working on it, but I think we've been saying that for about a year and a half now.
Exactly.
It's hard.
I remember before one Christmas, we're like, yay, we have merch. And it was like, no, we don't.
Yeah, it's because our logo's causing problems.
Oh, anyway.
We'll fix it. But anyway, so Sam is there with the skirt detective, and he insisted over and over again it was all a mistake. He's like, I would never do something like that. I am not a rapist. But Detective Seymour said, dude, we have your DNA from the rape kit in 2013. And so then Sam, not understanding that she'd been listening in the first time he spoke with Amber, told Detective Seymour the same story. Yes, they had sex. It was consensual because he responded to a Craigslist ad. And that's why his DNA showed up. But he never even saw what the woman looked like from the Craigslist ad who he had sex with. But then actually, Kath, Sam was helpful, and he offered up another suspect. And he goes, you know what? After I had the Craigslist sex in the park, I went home and ran into my roommate, Bryce. And I said, hey, you know what? There's a girl in the park offering free sex. You need to go over there and find her. Sam told the detective that Bryce left, and an hour or two later, he heard Bryce come back and he could hear a female voice with him. So Sam assumed it was the Craigslist woman from the park. But then Sam said he heard screaming and yelling coming from Bryce's bedroom. So he crept out of his room and looked under Bryce's bedroom door, like that little crack that sometimes is bigger if you've removed shag carpet.
Right. Could be 2 inches or 3 inches if you remove shag.
Exactly. But when he did that, Kath, he watched in horror as Bryce killed the woman he'd brought home from the park. So Sam said he went back into his room and hid, but after a few minutes went by and he didn't hear any more noises, he cracked open his door just in time to see Bryce leaving his room and carrying the woman. Her entire head was covered with a blanket and it was full of blood. But he conceded to Detective Seymour that he did not report Bryce to the police. Detective Seymour, of course, is listening to all of this. My assumption is she's professional enough not to be rolling her eyes at every single thing he's saying. But as soon as he was done, she's like, dude, none of what you're saying makes any sense. You are the man who attacked, raped, and strangled Amber. Your DNA proved it. So man up and take accountability for the things you've done. Amber used to be your friend. She needs that, and you know it. You heard the pain in her voice when she talked to you all those years ago. You get to change how Amber's story ended. But Sam's response was, la 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 la, I can't hear you. It was Bryce who attacked Amber and left her for dead.
So Detective Seymour, knowing Sam's DNA made him the most likely perpetrator, still needed to dot her I's and cross her T's, so she began looking into his alibi. So first she looked at childhood friend Bryce, who Sam supposedly saw kill a woman. So Detective Seymour and her partner actually went to the place that Bryce and Sam lived 4 years prior when Amber was attacked. And she got down on the ground and looked under the same bedroom door where Sam supposedly was looking when Bryce murdered this woman. And what was the detective able to see? A big fat nothing. At most, someone might have been able to see a heel pressed against the door. So detectives tracked down Bryce and told him what Sam said. And at first, Bryce was stunned, and then he became pissed. He said he could not ever have hurt Amber because he didn't even know her at the time of her attack. And as someone who'd been friends with Sam since they were both 5 years old, Bryce said the one thing you could always count on was that Sam was a constant liar. But the major part of Sam's alibi, this claim that he had sex with Amber after finding an ad on Craigslist, and by the way, back then, Craigslist, well, it still advertises skeezy stuff, but this is the kind of thing it would have published. So investigators spoke to the folks at Craigslist to find out if Amber had ever posted an ad, and then they also issued a search warrant for specific key words that Sam had used in his interview when he talked about the ad he responded to. And they were never able to locate any ad that had any amount of detail such as Sam said it had.
They also weren't ever able to match it to an email address that Amber had.
Right.
Anything like that.
No, they had to pretend as though she posted the ad and they needed to find
from
it.
There.
And they never did.
Right.
Because it didn't exist. Trial began in Fort Collins in August of 2019. Now, this is 6 years, almost to the day of Amber's attack. And the prosecution brought forward Officer Dane Stratton, and he was the officer who found Amber in the park on the night of the attack. And just as a side note, Officer Stratton was a rookie at the time who totally had PTSD.
He did.
Yeah.
He said it was the most horrific thing he'd ever seen. And as a result, Kathy, in the following years, and by that I mean like 2, 3, 4, 5, not like 20, 30, 40, when he patrolled the parks, he was especially cognizant of the women who were there and were they drinking too much, the men who were there, were they alone, were they being weird, and really made it his mission to make sure anybody who was out in the parks, at the restaurants, breweries, whatever, that everybody got home safely.
Right. And lecturing young men, like, don't let the women stay here by themselves.
Yeah.
Lecturing young women, don't leave your gal pals.
Exactly.
Anyway, so they also brought forth at trial the DNA analyst and, of course, Detective Seymour. And she testified about what happened to Amber that night, her interview of her in the hospital, and their search for her attacker. And the detective also testified about listening in on Sam and Amber's phone conversation, where Sam told Amber, "Oh, no, we had consensual sex after I responded to your Craigslist ad." And Detective Seymour also, of course, talked about the fact that they never found proof that any such ad existed. Amber took the stand, and she told the jury everything about waking up in this strange place in the middle of the night in extreme pain. She didn't understand why she couldn't open her eyes, why her hands were bound, why her throat hurt so badly. And she knew she needed help, and the only thing she could do was scream, so she screamed. And thankfully, people called 911. And Amber knew she saved herself, and she knew she saved herself for her son. And knowing Sam's defense, Amber struck first. She testified that Sam's claims were ridiculous and ugly, and that the Craigslist ad never happened.
Now, in a shock to everyone, considering the amount of evidence proving he was the perpetrator, Sam took the stand in his own defense. And once again, he reiterated his story about responding to an ad offering free sex at the park. However, unlike the prosecution's allegation, Sam, of course, insisted it was all consensual. He never raped her. And since she was giving out sexual favors that night, it was just a fluke that nobody else's DNA was left on her body. Now, Kath, even Sam's attorney acknowledged there was no evidence to show Amber actually posted anything on Craigslist, but the defense told the jury that Amber was found in a puddle of fluid. Now, here's what's so awful about that on a number of levels. One, ew.
Mm-hmm.
And two, they didn't mention, the prosecution did, but the defense didn't mention that the puddle of fluid was blood. They, of course, made it sound like it was sexually related.
Exactly. They wanted the jury to draw the inference that we just drew, like, ew.
Yeah.
You know?
And so the defense continued that because of how she was found, of course, cross-contamination happened, and that's what spread Sam's DNA to her neck. But when the defense also said that's how Sam's DNA got on the tape, meaning the cross-contamination, the prosecution shut that down. Because the analyst had testified that she found DNA only where the violent attacker could have left it. She didn't just swab the outside of the duct tape, which was what the defense was trying to sell to that jury, right? The contamination would only be on the outside areas. But this analyst also swabbed the sticky side of the tape. And those swabs only showed male DNA from Sam, and only Sam. The jury took less than a day to reach a verdict. The judge began with count 1, attempted first-degree murder. The jury found Sam Moon not guilty. And as soon as that came out of the foreperson's mouth, there was an audible gasp from the gallery with Amber's family and friends. They could not believe it. I mean, yeah, there were other charges, but those were lesser charges. And this was the one, of course, that they felt they had the most evidence for.
Right. And I think Bryce said it when he said, I've known Sam since I was 5 years old, and he is a constant liar. And my only guess is that he took the stand and just testified like a true sociopath. Lying was like breathing, and he made it look relaxed and probably could have passed a poly and, that kind of thing.
And so then the rest of the charges were read. Kidnapping, guilty. Sexual assault, guilty. And on and on and on for the rest of the charges. 2 months later, Sam Moon was sentenced, and the judge gave him the maximum sentence possible. 128 years to life.
Kaboom!
He won't be eligible for parole until the year 2115. If he lives that long, he'll be 130 years old. After sentencing, Amber said, I feel more at peace now. I feel like I can finally move on with my life. It does not define me anymore. I'm not a victim. I actually feel a sense of hope now, and I feel like I have a future ahead of me.
And here is one of our tangential stories that never made it into the episode because it was totally irrelevant and it was just us going off.
But you get to listen to it now.
Okay. Dude, my daughter told me a story.
Which one? Older or younger?
Older.
Okay.
And it cracked me up. Okay, so obviously she went to your freaking alma mater. So
alma mater. So it's all girls.
Yeah, exactly. And so she was saying they had a celibacy speaker coming. And so
no way. Wow, times have changed.
So she said, now there's 400 girls in the auditorium.
Oh, it's for everyone.
Oh yeah, everyone. The whole school was there. And this is what cracks me up. And so she goes, Mom, it was like a scene in Dairy Girls. She goes, this hot 25-year-old boy comes out and he takes the microphone and she goes, we went crazy, standing up, screaming, clapping, like totally standing ovation. And he was just staring at everybody. And the principal had to come up and tell them all to calm down and sit down for the celibacy speech.
Was it the principal or the dean of discipline?
Oh, I know who you're talking about.
I bet it was her.
Oh my God.
Oh my God, that's
I was
hysterical.
cracking. She goes, Mom, it was like a scene in Dairy Girls. It was hysterical.
They were probably yelling, take it off.
They probably were. But she goes, and we weren't stopping. We were on our feet. We were stomping the bleachers. We were screaming. Like,
oh my gosh.
This poor guy did not know what to do with himself.
He was probably trying to figure out which ones might be legal.
He's like, from now on, I'm going to public schools.
Exactly. They're much better behaved than you ladies.
Exactly.